You got it.
Okay. All right. Let's admit all. Okay.
I think I'm in. Can you see us? You can see me. Okay. I'm in.
All right. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your patience. We're glad you're here. We're just giving a few more minutes to everybody to be admitted. All right. Very good. So welcome again to Universal Design, How to Create a More Equitable Experience for All. My name is Claudia Ocello. The session's being recorded. And I'd like to introduce to you my co-hosts, Melody Caban, who is going to be posting stuff in the chat for everybody and letting people in and kind of other general co-host duties. And we also have Ellen Snyder-Grenier, who you will learn more about momentarily. But I need to also share with you, I need to give you a little background on IMP. So let me do that while I have you up here. Get over to my screen share. Okay. So I can't see my screen, so I can't tell when I'm changing slides or not. So sorry, little bit of a technical glitch here. I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute so I can get back to that and start again. All right. Always a treat on Zoom, isn't it? If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, we can do that while we're waiting. So please feel free to, go right ahead and give us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're coming from, that kind of thing. Okay, here we go. All right. So what is the IMP? So Independent Museum Professionals is a professional network of consultants and freelancers who work in all areas of museums and with all types of museums. Our network provides a central hub of resources, knowledge, and connections. We actively work to support independent museum professionals, strengthen the relationship between independent museum professionals and museums, and advance the museum field. If you're interested in getting involved, we would love for you to volunteer. We'll provide more info at the end of the session. Let me turn it over now to our program moderator, Ellen Snyder-Grenier. So I am going to go dark here personally, but you will still see the screen. And there's the rest of the mission of IMPs. And there's the rest about our presenters.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And it's really wonderful to be here. I am so excited about this panel. We have two amazing speakers today, Valerie Fletcher and Cheryl Fogle-Hatch. I wanted to just give a few words about our format today. First, Valerie Fletcher, who is director at the Institute for Human-Centered Design in Boston. She'll start us off with more of a kind of higher level view of universal, or the word that she prefers to use now, inclusive design. And then Cheryl Fogle-Hatch, who is the founder of Museum Senses LLC, will focus on a little bit of a more specific level, focusing on work she's done at the Peel Museum in Baltimore for an exhibition titled Founding Fossils. Then we're going to have some time afterwards for questions and answers. I wanted to mention that we got some really terrific questions in the registration forms. So we're going to start with them. And if we have time, we'll open up for questions from the chat. But I also wanted to mention that our speakers have very generously offered to include their email addresses So if you have a question that's really important and you feel that it's not answered in the course of the webinar, please feel free to reach out to them. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Valerie and Cheryl, who bring deep expertise and experience to today's topic. We are thrilled that they generously agreed to do this webinar for IMP today and hope that this presentation, the questions and answers, and the resources that Melody will share in the chat with you will really give you some insight into how you can make your projects accessible and equitable to the widest range of people. Valerie Fletcher is going to start us off, and she is Executive Director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design. And she'll talk about inclusive design's role in creating a physical and digital world that is more equitable, that anticipates risk, minimizes limitations, and honors our interdependence across the spectrum of ability, age, and culture. And then right after Valerie speaks, Cheryl Fogel-Hatch will make her presentation. As I mentioned, she is founder of Museum Senses, and she'll discuss her work researching and developing multisensory experiences for museums and other cultural organizations. By creating exhibit content with tactile and audio components, she believes, we can more fully engage visitors who are blind or have low vision, and that by exposing people who are sighted to tactile and audio content, we can create better and more integrated experiences for everyone. So now let me turn it over to Valerie, who will start us off. Valerie.
Ellen, thank you. Thank you also to Claudia and Melody. I'm probably one of many people who would do anything in the world for Ellen Snyder-Grenier. So thrilled to be here today. Next slide, please. Disability and diversity, I want to frame it that way. Next slide, please. And just a little snapshot of prevalence of disability in the United States. It's 1 in 4 of adults, 26%, largest minority in the US. And it doesn't fall equally on everybody. We don't have fabulous data on, for instance, the Latino community or on the Asian community. However, we have quite good data on Native Americans, which have an alarming rate of 40% rate of disability. We have a 25% rate among Black adults. One of the things we know without ambiguity is that disability tends to fall more heavily on communities of color. So it is very much about our inclusion and diversity agenda. Next, please. I also want to just make note that this is also very much about the reality of our lucky time in which we live longer than people have generally lived before. And we are looking at cruising towards close to 100 million Americans by 2060 who are over 65. And 40% of that group have a disability. And I will tell you that of that group, probably a very small percentage would actually identify and adopt an identity as a person with a disability. So these are realities of functional limitation across the spectrum of mobility, sensory and brain-based issues, but doesn't necessarily result in people adopting that identity. Next, please. And it's important to note that the tracking of reasons for disability in America has largely been led by the Centers for Disease Control. And they provide national prevalence data that is regularly updated. The most recent update at the end of 2023, for the first time, brought what they call cognition, but is actually more accurately a spectrum of brain-based reasons for disability forward as the most prevalent reason for disability in America. You can see here on the chart with a 12.1% for people with mobility limitations, that it isn't too far behind. We've got 12.8% for people with brain-based issues. And then it drops to difficulty doing errands alone, which is called independent living, at 7.2. But we're looking at a pretty significant shift that most Americans are not aware of. And it's terribly important when we think about museums. There's no surprise in this data. Anybody who tracks disability among children and youth knows this has been coming as a phenomenon for decades, and it is now here. So really important, we're looking at mental health issues, we're looking at neurodiversity, we're looking at brain injury, we're looking at a lot of the neurological conditions that also have a brain component, and we're looking at the reality of how our brains change when we age. Next, please. And I want to also note, because this is important, particularly in a cultural context, where I think we have a very rich engagement by people from the LGBTQ world. It's just a picture of very diverse people standing or crouched in front of a typical multicolor rainbow flag. And the point here is really just to make note that this is a well-documented national phenomenon, that we have higher rates of disability in the LGBTQ community among adults. It's 1 in 3 instead of 1 in 4. Next, please. And this broad categories, it can seem overwhelming, the incredible diversity of human ability. We break it into 3 big buckets: physical, with mobility, reach, dexterity, strength, stamina; sensory, sight, hearing, speech, and touch; and brain-based, which is a long list, because that really is the more sort of nuanced variety of brains that work differently. I want to also just make a note here that one of the fastest rising reasons for disability in America is often a combination of all 3, and those are chronic health conditions. Again, that's a population unlikely to self-identify as being a person with a disability. However, they are part of the protected class of people covered under the law in the United States. And just a note on that, and I trust this may be familiar to many of you, is that long COVID is one of those conditions that is now a chronic condition, and it is 6.7% of the adult population in the US. So it's a big story, but there's all kinds of other things that have changed how we need to think about the environments we build, the context we create, and the experience we wish to share. Next, please. Inclusive design is my term of choice, and I'll explain that to you in a minute, but we are old players and pioneers in the world of universal design. We published our first book in 1995 on strategies for teaching universal design, and we were primary hosts of the first international conference back in 1998 in New York with the UN. And the principles still, I think, are reliable. There are 7 ideas about design that thinks about people as a starting point: equitable, flexible, simple and intuitive, perceptible information, tolerance for error, maybe we don't think about that one anywhere near enough, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. Next slide, please. It builds on what we understand of accessibility, which is a floor, a baseline, and not a very high one. What I want to draw your attention to that may or may not be familiar is that there is a link here to international policy on defining disability. And that's from the World Health Organization. And this actually was initially published in 2001. And it's quite a radical departure from what existed before. Functional limitation is a universal human experience. It is not about them over there. It's about us. Equity between mental and physical reasons. And from my conversations with folks at the World Health Organization, it took 10 years to do this, took 8 to get this agreement: equity between mental and physical reasons. Focus on the potent role of context. This is the heart of our work. This notion that disability occurs at the intersection of the person and their environment. Regardless of what you bring to that environment, it is at that intersection that it is either disabling or no big deal. So our goal is to make it no big deal. Physical, information, communication, and attitudinal environments were identified as the central concerns of context. And if we're not looking at that in a museum and exhibit context, I don't know what we're doing. And just this notion that it's not just barrier removal. With the nature and experience of disability today, barrier removal is just not good enough. And you're going to hear more about that from Cheryl. But what we're looking for is more facilitating environments for independence, for experience, for equity, for participation, in my book, for richness of experience. And they endorsed at that time, just a few years after the principles were codified, universal design is the most promising framework for delivering this kind of work. Next, please. And why do I switch? Why? This was not an easy switch. We started this switch in a big way in 2016. I was actually traveling with the beloved and extraordinary and unrivaled Judy Heumann, really sort of the godmother of the disability rights movement, and testing out inclusive and universal with ordinary folks in airports and restaurants and hotels. And we definitely found that there was a pickup on inclusive as a meaningful term over inclusive, over universal. For us, it more directly states a commitment to diversity in the role of design and equity. It also resonates with ordinary people. Universal design sounds a bit like there might be a holy grail at the end and we will one day finish this. In my book, there's no end to this. This is a continuous process of constantly evolving more responsive solutions and learning from the people experiencing these differences. It also anticipates and responds to the intersection of disability with culture and gender identity, which I think are really important parts, certainly of this culture. Next, please. And just my last comment is just so many of us are invested in creating this context. I think that's probably what all of you do. You could have a calling card that says context maker. This global policy, and it is a huge asset for those of us that work internationally, to be able to have the shorthand of this policy. It's an invitation to minimize limitations while creating solutions that work better for everyone. And I'll leave you with one last bit that we believe in deeply from all the work that we do across the United States and across the globe. If it works well for people at the edges of the spectrum, it's going to work better for everybody. It is not a disadvantage for the rest of the user population. Thanks very much. I pass it on to Cheryl. Next slide, please.
So thank you so much, Valerie. That was fabulous. So now for our second presenter, we're going to hear from Dr. Cheryl Vogelhatch, founder of Museum Senses LLC. So take it away, Cheryl.
Yeah. Thanks, Ellen. My first slide, if it's up. I help museums increase access for all visitors. I help create multi-sensory exhibits for everyone. So I'm talking about tactile and audio components. Today, I'll mostly talk about tactile components, but if you go up on my blog, I do talk about more audio and sonification, which is non-speech audio for data. But I do this, and I say everyone, because if there's a touch object in a museum gallery, I'm going to touch it if I know about it, and you're probably going to touch it and look at it. So that's why I say everyone. Next slide, please. So we have a new exhibit opened. We scheduled it to open at 8 a.m., but it's open May to December in Baltimore at the Peel Museum, which is downtown on Holiday Street. So if you are in or near Baltimore between now and December, I highly recommend you go to it. This is an exhibit that I brought from design and to opening with a co-curator, an archaeologist and an academic who does 3D scanning of fossils. And one of his students put together a comic book because there's a story about how the early American founders, had an interest in fossils. And so it tells that story visually. And when I found out about that, I contacted him and I contacted the Peel Museum because that's one of the key players in the early American story. And I said, we've got this exhibit content. He's got the capability to make it multimodal. Let's explore this as a design. So that's why I named it Founding Fossils, to distinguish it from the comic book that it originated from. But Founding Fossils is multisensory. It includes 3D printed replicas and sculptures, and they are painted to resemble the original fossils. So it has that visual component too. It has text labels in Braille and print. And it has an audio tour that you can get to, scan a QR code, and it brings up a Smartify app. That's the Peel system for doing audio. That little bit is not quite as intuitive as I would like, but it is the system that's there. So I put the link there, and I would highly recommend you explore that exhibit link a little bit more at leisure. Next slide, please. So one of the things I do is help curators, exhibit designers, museum people try to figure out what objects can be touched You all think in visual terms for exhibit design. There's books upon books about print label design, et cetera, et cetera. There's books about exhibit design. But the knowledge base for tactile design is more limited and it's more scattered, and that's another conversation for a different topic, but it's research that I'm working on with colleagues. So for touch objects, one way to do it is put an original collections object up. If you've got a bunch of them and it's durable enough and you can swing it. So that's why I've got the porcelain touch station here. This is a historic house in New Jersey. Claudia has probably seen this in action. She's familiar with this museum, but it's that is their part of their touch tour, and I consulted with them because they wanted to come up with objects that represent each room. So that is in the dining hall. And next slide, please. Another way to do touch objects is to do an artist recreation. And I've gone back to Founding Fossils for that. This is an image of a mastodon sculpture from Founding Fossils. The way that was done is there's one of the students from Virginia Commonwealth University with the 3D printing. She created a sculpture out of modeling clay, and then they 3D printed it. The reason she used a clay as the medium is to have a very detailed, lots of detail on the characteristics of the mastodon. 3D printing can be a little mushy, but so the 3D scan of the sculpture gives a lot of detail to the image. And of course, Founding Fossils, the whole premise is most of the visual elements have a tactile element in place with it. There's a couple that didn't, just for timing, but the touch object is like in kind to the visual object. There's a painting above that's the excavation of the mastodon, and so the mastodon model enhances that interpretation. It matches the goal. There's a reason why you put that out to touch. It relates to what's being shown. Next slide, please. So I have another slide from Founding Fossils, the artist in the museum, and these are selected main highlights from the painting, the bust of the artist and the bones. And that is something that we wanted to have the main elements to paint a picture, both in touch objects and that reflects the visible picture. Next slide, please. Now I have to say this, all the objects I've shown you from my previous slides are touch objects that are meaningful. They are visually appealing and they are also tactily appealing. There are, in some cases, objects that are visually appealing and they do not have tactile. You would think they would, but they don't. There's a company called Explicator that exhibited at AAM, and they sent out this thing, an email about Legos and mosaics, and I thought, oh, cool, Legos, I can feel them. I can pull those bricks apart. I remember playing with those as a kid. So I was going through the exhibit hall. I was with a colleague, and I said, let's go find this. So we found it. She's like, oh, cool, there's a mosaic. And then she paused and said, you won't get much out of this. It's visually appealing, but there's nothing there tactually. So to both of us, it just feels like a sheet of dots. And that's kind of where sometimes what you might hope is tactile is not, just because we so default to the visual presentation. There are other anecdotes and things like that in amongst the community. Someone came on from Planet Word, and apparently you've got a lot of visual presentations of language, spoken language, written language, which there could be audio things as well, but I've heard this secondhand. I haven't been to your facility. But that being said, I bring that up because there are gaps and there are lots of things that need to be done, and you know, there's 35,000 museums in the US and then internationally, so it's going to take a very long while to get to everyone, and we keep plugging away. Next slide, please. I would just like to say that just remember that if you create an exhibit, you can have visually appealing stuff. I don't begrudge you that. But if you have tactile stuff and audio stuff and components, it can help people who are blind become more engaged with arts and science and other kinds of topics. And this is also good for sighted people, to expose sighted people to tactile and audio content and just kind of plant the seed for you can present content in another way. And you can always hope that the seed is planting and they'll do something with it. And so if you create a multimodal, multisensory exhibit, you are more likely to create integrated experiences for all visitors. And I believe that comes to the end of my slides. So
I have to unmute myself. Sorry about that. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you. So I'm really happy that we have a good amount of time to have a conversation. And but first, I want to take a moment to thank both Valerie and Cheryl, because I think that was not just informative, but inspiring. And I think it gives all of us something to really think about. Side note, I only recently met Cheryl, but I was blown away by the work that she did at the Peel Museum, which I have to get down to see, but I was able to go online and looked at different sources and what had been done. And it really just looks not only visually fascinating, but so inviting and just so appealing to all visitors that it's almost like you couldn't imagine it being done any other way and being as interesting. So that was phenomenal. I really encourage you to go to the website. And I also wanted to, as an additional side note, I've known Valerie longer. I first met her about 14 years ago, working on a project in New York City on Governor's Island. And what I learned from her and from her passion and her kindness has really stayed with me. And I've never forgotten what she mentioned today about this idea of what happens at the intersection of a person with their environment, and the idea of the context being so important. And for me, as an exhibition developer, I carry that with me always, and it's helped me look at everything in new ways. And it's hard now to look at a project and not imagine including elements that are, tactile or are multisensory, appealing to all the senses, or just thinking about things like, this particular project was outdoors, and I still remember Valerie's team talking about, okay, well, let's look at what are people standing or sitting on, or what is their wheelchair on, and how much sun is there, and all these things about comfort, which when you look at it, all seems obvious, but it's not always something that we look at. So I just really I'm a huge fan, and really am inspired. So let's turn to our experts to ask some of the questions. And as I said, I'm going to start with those that were submitted prior to this event, when people sent in questions with the registration. And the first one I'm going to ask, and is really something that I think came up more than once in the questions, and that is, have you experienced pushback on accessibility from clients, and do you have suggestions on how to respond?
Which of us do you want? Should we
You
just
just
Nell?
jump in. Now, why don't you go first?
All right. Of course. For the most part, first of all, we are a nonprofit. So we're a global nonprofit. We've been around since 1978. So we've been a long time. And our work is always focused on the role of design in social equity. And we're extremely busy and do no marketing. So I don't have to take any job that doesn't make sense to me. And when I encounter a client that is dragging their feet and basically wanting to know, what can we get away with? What is the minimum we can do? We decline to assist. We give them a brief lecture about, this is about the human condition, and we assume that humans are your clients, and that this is probably something that you don't want to ignore. But we just wish them well and let them go on their way. It is the client that really wants to do something, but not very much, that is probably more challenging. They'd like it to be cost neutral. And one of the things we've learned over time, and I'm proud to say that we are on our 66th museum project in 10 years, just in the last decade. And we're very fortunate because we have a marvelous team led by the incomparable Jan Majewski. And our work is extremely varied. And part of what what we get better and better at, I think, is to help people to recognize that clients very seldom know what they want. I feel like I'm revealing like a secret of consulting, but many of you who do consulting must know that clients often do not know what they want and cannot articulate it. So part of what we're doing is helping them to think about what is their intent and what might a scope of work look like, and to define that until we can reach consensus. And very often we are expanding what they think they are able to do by reframing it. So that's, the older I get, the more I realize that this is a skill I want all of my staff, all the way down to the 20-year-olds, to recognize that for all the places that work in their career, if you can negotiate with another human and seek to infuse them with the things you value, your career will go well.
Lovely. So Cheryl, do you have any, can you share any thoughts you have about pushback on accessibility that you might have encountered?
Business-wise, I started my consulting practice a few months before we shut down for COVID. So from a business perspective, I usually, if someone's not interested, it's just radio silence. From a lived experience perspective, I've been fighting these battles for much longer, and in students and in my other free consultant day jobs. And those are mismatches between, a lot of times, between how someone thinks you have to do a task and what are some of the alternative techniques that you can do to do a task. And so a lot of it is organizational culture. I years ago had an intern supervisor who thought that I couldn't page to be let in the back door of the museum because I couldn't operate the keypad. So I just had to reach past her and punch in the number on the keypad and said, got it. There's these, we think of people with disabilities as being other, especially if you don't have that social context. I was reading my notes as I was presenting. I was reading from a Braille display. So I was reading in Braille, and I had a screen reader, although I was muted while I was talking, my screen reader, synthetic speech to read the screen. So we have ways of operating a computer, but many people don't know that. And so the pushback is fundamentally rooted in assumptions. I do this task visually, you do not have vision. I don't understand how you can't do that task. And it's not so much, if someone tells me I don't understand how you do XYZ, I'll tell them, that's fine, I can handle that. But if they go to the you can't do XYZ, and I can't get them to understand how I do XYZ, then you just have to grit your teeth and deal. I never did warm up to that supervisor who thought I couldn't operate a phone keypad. She had already, I found out years later, just in the small world that we're in, that other people had problems with her that were not related to me and not related to disability. So if people are difficult as human beings, add disability on as another layer and they're difficult. But I would say honesty is the best answer. If you don't know how something can be done, I'd rather you ask. And I think a lot of the pushback is either someone doesn't want to ask, which I would like to believe that most people don't want to ask, or don't understand how things work. And yes, there are costs, and yes, there are budgets. And I get that. there are organizational cultural things, but most of these can be solved. I
Great.
think.
Yeah, thank you. That was very insightful. Thank you. Well, this sort of leads me on to the next question about, a small museum with smaller budgets that really wants to provide better access to all visitors.
Mhm.
The questions were really specifically asked about exhibits, but also about programming.
Mhm.
And really is earnest and really wants to do something. What do you have any suggestions on what they can do, or any ideas for grant sources? And just personally, one that comes to mind, this is just a little one, not little, well, not that little, but in a lot of museums I visit, I'm always shocked when the point size for text is tiny in this day and age. And that is something that seems to me that can be more easily fixed. But I'm curious for both Valerie and Cheryl, are there suggestions you might have on what you can do on a limited budget when you are earnest and you really do want to do something? So maybe Valerie, will go back to you again to start, and then Cheryl.
Thanks, Ellen. And I think we all deal with clients that we just want to do whatever we can because we know they haven't got 10 cents. But they are sincere and they really do want to make the experience different and better for everyone, with an attention to people at the edges. One of the things that we always recommend is that modifying your website to communicate information, even if it's not positive, like this, you should be prepared for this when you come, is something that people respect. And it means you've anticipated them. You're still welcoming them, but you want them to know what may be barriers about their experience. But the website is usually a pretty cheap way to do something. We also, the label recommendation is a terrific one. It's not cost-free, but boy, it's a lot cheaper than almost anything. And it really makes an enormous difference. One of the other things that we always recommend is that training your staff is the fastest route to changing your culture as it relates to welcoming everyone. And remember, among the things the World Health Organization is concerned about in terms of context and how do we create a more inclusive context, it's attitude. And one of the most negative attitudes that we've encountered is not actually negative, it's anxiety about not knowing what to do. So if you can train your staff, or you can be the one to offer that training to staff, it's about building confidence that they can make small decisions about intersecting with people that are all about giving people a good experience. That can have untold consequences on a positive level every day. And lastly, I want to leave you with one thing that is mysteriously absent from most people's thinking. Everybody knows that private donors are a really important part of museum life, that private donors keep a lot of museums alive. And we think about them for the giant things, the big capital projects, the expansion, the renovation, but private donors who could be identified for a manageable package, even for a pretty ordinary family, to be able to donate, for example, the benches that are not there. And to make that a gift to the museum. It's not insurmountable. Pretty much everybody could manage something like that as a family gift or a legacy gift. And we just very seldom run into people who recognize that accessibility and inclusive design is a terrific packaging opportunity for donors. So, few thoughts.
Cheryl, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm noticing comments in the chat. The WebAIM tool, yes, I use it. I've been known to send people screenshots when I can't access their websites. The comment about designing for all people, definitely helpful. I use that all the time. So yay. If I can plug the resource section, I was recently in a working group. We developed a toolkit called Making History Accessible. It was for historic sites, but art museums and other folks, science museums folks could use it as well. But we talked about finding a small museum, finding local partners, finding university partners, finding organizational partners, and probably your initial cost is time, staff and volunteer time to try to find your connections. But seeing what other resources you can tap into. And the Making History Accessible Toolkit talks about various community involvements and using artist recommendations and local artists to make commission objects for you and things like that. Yep, of course, I see Laureen's comment. She's got some stuff coming up on evaluation. So, but I lost my train of thought. But yeah, Making History Accessible is a good resource for people.
Awesome,
If-
awesome.
if I
Thank
could-
you.
If I could just interject one more thing. We have a research practice that is really a version of contextual inquiry. So engaging real people with lived experience of a disability or multiple disabilities, stipended always for their time and sharing their expertise. But that is a means by which we are identifying what works and what fails. And it's at a very specific level. It's really at that intersection. We're studying the context. We never do a focus group. We are always looking at what happens with the individual interacting. And one of the things that is a near guarantee of that process is that people with disabilities are geniuses at workarounds. They have figured out how to make things work, and they are happy to tell you how you can make it work better. And in many cases, that is indeed a cost neutral bit of a solution, something to pay attention to, that you just can't navigate the world as a person with a functional limitation without being really good at being a workaround designer. So just keep that in mind.
Good point. Great. Another question that several people asked about, they're interested in designing this is a specific question about designing for neurodivergent audiences. And one person asked, can you give examples of outside the box ideas for neurodivergent visitors, i.e. 3D replicas of wallpaper to touch, anything else? So do you have any specific suggestions for that?
I can begin. Yes, of course. I mean, I think this is really important. May I make a pitch at the very beginning to recognize that this isn't a condition exclusive to children, because there's this curious failure to recognize that people who are neurodiverse, including people even with quite severe autism, become adults. And those adults are actually avid museum goers in many cases, if the museum is welcoming. And among the things that we have become very clear about is that many adults who are neurodiverse see museums as places where like-minded folks with similar disabilities could come together for social events. They are actually advocating for having, an evening once every month or once every 2 months where adults on the spectrum or adults who are neurodiverse can come together and feel like they can have an easier time of it because everybody is sort of in the same broad boat. So I want to make a pitch for adults first. On the child side, I think that the thing that we have found most effective is to recognize that there is no standard solution that works for everybody. These are incredibly diverse conditions. And if you're going to use the umbrella term of neurodiversity, it's everything from dyslexia and dyscalculia all the way to the deep end of the pool at the autism spectrum disorder. And, I think for us, we want to recognize that this is an extraordinary large group of people, extremely diverse in their needs and preferences. And that there is a group within the deep end of the pool, about 1 in 4 of people with autism have very significant needs, and that it's difficult for families to take them anywhere and feel that everybody can have a good time. So the solutions are really different. One of the things that we feel strongly about is that it is a good idea to plan on a place for people to take a break, whether they're adults or children, that it is outside of the normal path of traffic, that if it's a young child that may need to run or scream or whatever, you want that to be in an environment that won't bother other people. And lastly, I think just that reminder that one size does not fit all. One of the things we feel pretty strongly about is that it is a good idea to have a policy of having times during the week or the month when people can come in, when the lights are lower, the sound is lower, and people can come in and have family members with them who may be, quite disabled. And there's no stigma to it. You're not struggling to try to control someone who may not be able to control themselves easily. And it might just easier for people. We also recommend that not be all you do, because we are hopeful always, and many of our clients have shown good results in that is a transitional experience. It is not the only experience. And that you move on to people who are comfortable enough with going to this place that they can plan a trip when everybody else goes. And you can't really legally restrict people with disabilities to only having special programming. So just a few thoughts.
It's great. Cheryl, do you have any thoughts on that for neurodivergent audiences?
I would tend to agree with Valerie. If someone asks me questions, I tend to go to publicly available resources. I am a one-person shop, and it is not my strength, though it is important.
Great, great.
If I might just add to Cheryl's expertise, we have found that the tactile experience that she so beautifully interprets is one of the most desirable things. And 3D printing, love the recommendation about clay, but 3D printing, partnering with a local design school, for example, even a local design high school, can give you access to inexpensive 3D objects that can be shared. In a natural history museum, we have found an unseemly appetite for touching teeth, fossil teeth, and you're not going to share the real fossil teeth.
No.
So 3D printed fossil teeth are a pretty exciting thing for a kid. That's sort of whether that kid is on the spectrum or otherwise, touching those things creates a level of excitement.
I love that. And, it actually doesn't surprise me for some reason. I could kind of see that. Let's see. I'm going to grab one question from the chat, and then I have a couple more from the from the registration. So this question is, with so few people with low vision reading Braille, how useful are Braille panels versus audio or other elements?
Yeah, we try to do both, just because sometimes people, there are discrepancies in when people learn Braille and whether they learn Braille, and there are school systems that force people to use what little sight they have when Braille would be more recommended, and there are older adults who don't learn it. So you need both, ideally, and there's advocacy and happen to, because essentially if someone doesn't learn to read Braille, they're illiterate. And there are spelling consequences and all sorts of other consequences, and it's a huge mess in the education space. So we are not into equal education, unfortunately, in this country. And I don't know what the world standards are, but it is something that I always tell people to do both if they can.
If I could interject, one of the things to keep in mind is that the population of people who are legally blind are primarily people with low vision. That
Right.
People who are completely blind are rare. I would affirm Cheryl's point that if you do learn Braille, and this is going to be for people who are overwhelmingly people who are either born blind or become blind very young, that learn Braille. In all the years of working with people in many different environments, the fluent Braille reader is at a massive advantage. It's really quite extraordinary. But there are not a lot of people. And it is important to remember that the leading cause of blindness in America is diabetic retinopathy. It takes decades to lose your sight. By the time you've lost your sight, you don't have any sensation in your fingertips. So no one answer is going to be the answer.
Oh, that's fascinating. Let's see here. Another question I have. Oh, and I just wanted to mention, I saw somebody note, a couple people noted in the chat that they do not have a disability, but that they really enjoy all these
Yeah.
elements of universal design. And I just think we want to reinforce that it really does, as
Yeah.
you both have so beautifully expressed, really does make a better experience for everyone. But
And just a reminder, Ellen, that our brains and bodies don't work the same day after day. It
I
seems
know that.
patently obvious, and yet it
Yeah.
seems to be pervasively forgotten. But, you know, if you're up all night with a kid, or you've got, you know, a Charlie horse that is making stairs impossible, you don't know where it came from, or you are so distracted by a sick parent or child that you can't think. You know, these things, thinking about human diversity of ability is absolutely for all of us, all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And the other thing I'd say is, you know, people are always looking for the one thing that works. It's like,
Mm.
and I've asked some colleagues I know, it's like, what's the one thing that sighted people like when they have pictures and labels? What's the one thing that sighted people do? Does every sighted people read the print labels? You
No.
know, and but yet somehow there's supposed to be the one thing that I might do, or the one thing that
Oh,
all people might do.
that's what a great perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. I think we have probably time for one more question. Let's see. There was in the chat somebody who was curious about how do you evaluate the impact of inclusive or universal design? And is there anything different in the way that evaluation might be done, or?
I think that it's important to think about the kinds of things that we want to have as outcomes to this work. And I think, quite honestly, they're rather commonplace words from a long time ago in terms of how we evaluate design. And it's thinking about comfort, confidence, and control. If we have made recent changes in this exhibit or in this museum, have we succeeded in giving you a sense of comfort, confidence, and control? Is there a place you can sit? It's extraordinary how much we find ourselves arguing with designers about the distaste for places to sit, and how often mere humans and visitors are dying for a place to sit, especially as we diversify our aspirations about who uses museums.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a parent with several children coming to a museum might want to park on a particular bench, and those kids run around for a couple of hours,
Mm.
know where to find her at, you know, at the next point they need food or whatever. But we are, you know, I think we really have to be thinking about these things. I am finding in our research that if you can provide a greater sense of control, and that may be about choice, it may be about, these are the things I love, I hope I have the opportunity to have those experiences, people are happy. I mean, these are pretty easy things for people to respond to. And they're still, you know, subjective. But I think if we succeed, those are the things people get more of.
That's fabulous. Thank you. And I think actually we just because I realize we're coming to the close of our time, and Cheryl, I don't want to skip
fine.
you for this one, but I know Claudia has a few things to say.
Go ahead.
As a Claudia, Cheryl did provide a link in the resources to a forthcoming book about evaluation. Oh, yeah,
Great.
perfect. So with that, I'm going to thank you both again. That was just absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to turn it back to Claudia.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen and Cheryl and Valerie. Wow, very enlightening, insightful, just so much that you provided for all of us. I can't thank you, all three of you, enough. So I am just going to close us out with a couple more, little bit more information on independent museum professionals. As the immediate past chair, I would love for you to keep in touch. If you haven't signed up for our mailing list or listserv, you can go to our website, which is listed here, to get more information about what's coming up. Here's how to contact us, and here's how to contact the presenters. So you can reach out to them if your question was not answered or you have further thoughts or questions. If you want to get more involved with independent museum professionals, we would love to have you, as I mentioned earlier. And here's where you can find us, both our website on the platform formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and on LinkedIn. So there's more information there. And again, if you want to be involved, you can certainly send us program ideas, and there's a survey that I'm pretty sure Melody put in the chat that you could fill out, and there's a space on there for a little bit more about ways that you could think that you'd like to get involved, some other ideas that you might have. Here's the survey link in case you need it that way. We are really grateful for your participation today and for attending. Please tell a friend about independent museum professionals. Please also share what you've learned so that the museum world can get a lot more inclusive. So, oops, we forgot to put in our upcoming events. We do have some stuff planned for the fall, some more webinars. Sorry about that. More webinars, and you can find out more about that on our website. Again, you'll be able to register. If you sign up on our mailing list, you'll get some advance notice about that. So that's it. So thank you so much for participating. Ellen, thank you for getting everybody together so that we could have a really great time here. And I want to thank everybody again. I hope to see you at a future program or as part of the Independent Museum Professional Networks. And thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.